did a 3-hour show. Can you imagine? From 7 until 9 in the morning is when, as far as Chicago, there wasn't even a full network. And then we had to do an hour repeat from 9 to 10 for the West Coast.
Right.
A 3-hour show, ad-libbed.
On February 11th, 1960, Jack Paar did something no TV host had ever done. He looked into the camera during his live show and quit in front of millions. On the surface, it looked like he was furious because NBC cut a toilet joke without telling him. But that wasn't the real story. For weeks, something darker had been building behind the scenes. When he finally returned a month later, his first words shocked America even more. The man who invented late-night TV was never the same again. Jack Paar was born on May 1st, 1918, in Canton, Ohio. When he was 5, his older brother died in a car crash. That loss stayed with him for the rest of his life. It shook his family to the core and shaped the way Jack saw the world. His parents struggled to move forward, and young Jack soaked in the sadness around him. It didn't just make him quiet or cautious. It made him feel everything deeply. That tragedy followed him into adulthood. It was one of the reasons he connected so strongly with people on screen. Behind his fame were old wounds that never fully healed. As a child, he faced another challenge that nearly silenced him. He had a severe stutter. Speaking out loud was painful. It turned everyday conversations into battles. To fight it, he tried strange methods. He stuffed buttons in his mouth to train his tongue. He yelled at the walls in his bedroom at night, trying to say words clearly. These acts weren't just odd habits. They were acts of pure desperation. His stutter didn't go away easily, but it made him obsessed with how people speak. That obsession later helped him become one of the most memorable voices on television. At 14, Jack fell seriously ill. He had tuberculosis, and in the 1930s, that was terrifying. He spent 8 months stuck in bed, away from friends, away from the world. But instead of giving in, he turned to his imagination. He began hosting fake radio shows in his head. He created guests, jokes, even music. All of it played out in his mind. The disease didn't break him. It gave him a dream. He realized he wanted to be on the radio. He wanted to entertain. That sickbed became his first stage. When he finally recovered, he carried that dream with him. At 16, Jack dropped out of Jackson High School. It was 1934, in the middle of the Great Depression. Education meant safety, but Jack took a risk. He had no diploma, no training, and no connections. But he had a voice and a dream. He knew he wouldn't find success in a classroom. He believed the real lessons were on the job. He wanted to work in radio, no matter what it took. That bold decision set the tone for everything that came after. He was willing to gamble his future on his instincts. His first job in radio was at WIBM in Jackson, Michigan. It wasn't glamorous. He read a simple line on air. "This is station WIBM, Jackson." The rest of his day was janitorial. He swept floors and took out the trash. But Jack didn't complain. He watched. He listened. He learned. He studied the equipment. He mimicked the announcers. Slowly, he earned more airtime. Step by step, he climbed up. That experience grounded him. He didn't forget the dirt on his shoes or the broom in his hand. It made him patient, humble, and hungry for more. Then came Pearl Harbor. In 1942, Jack was drafted into the U.S. Army at 25. He was assigned to the 28th Special Service Company. Their job was to entertain soldiers. At first, he stood out. His polished voice and clean fingernails didn't fit in. But things changed when he was sent to the South Pacific. Life there was brutal. Long days, little food, constant fear. But Jack had one thing others didn't: humor. One day, during a submarine alert, he cracked a joke that the Japanese sub was trying to bring us food. It broke the tension. Soldiers laughed until they cried. He became their favorite act. During basic training, he went to a dinner dance. That's where he met Miriam Wagner. She was from Hershey, Pennsylvania, and her family had ties to the chocolate company. Jack saw her and decided right then he was going to marry her. The next day, they got engaged. It sounded crazy, but it worked. They were married on October 9, 1943, in Campbelltown, Pennsylvania. That marriage lasted over 60 years until his death in 2004. She became his anchor. Through war, fame, and breakdowns, she stood by him. Their love story wasn't a show, it was real. While performing for the troops, Jack found his edge. He made fun of the officers. He mocked the military rules. He turned frustration into laughter. He once told a lieutenant, "A man with your IQ should have a low voice too." In another show, he said, "Some try, a few are sincere, and what the hell, a couple even know what they're doing." He wasn't afraid. Soldiers loved him for saying what they couldn't. Officers didn't always approve, but they couldn't ignore his popularity. He was sharp, bold, and unforgettable. Among the troops, he outshone stars like Bob Hope and Jack Benny. A war correspondent named Sidney Carroll saw one of his shows in 1944. Carroll wrote about it in Esquire. He praised Jack's fearless comedy. The article made its way back home. It changed everything. Suddenly, Jack Paar was on the map. After World War II, Jack Paar signed with RKO. At the time, the studio was run by Howard Hughes, a billionaire with a strange and unpredictable style. It was a big opportunity. RKO was one of the top 5 film studios in Hollywood. But even with his charm and comedy skills, Paar didn't fit anywhere. The people in charge didn't know what to do with him. They tried giving him screen tests and small roles, hoping something would click. But nothing worked. They kept arguing over whether he should be a leading man or just a funny side character. No one could agree. The whole thing felt stuck. One executive called him Kay Kaiser with warmth. That meant he reminded them of the popular band leader who acted goofy on the radio. But Paar was friendlier. Another said he looked like Alan Ladd, the serious, cool star of dark dramas like Shane. The problem was obvious. Kaiser and Ladd were nothing alike. The fact that they compared Paar to both meant they were completely lost. No one had a clear idea of what kind of actor he was. That confusion didn't stay behind closed doors either. It followed him onto every set. He was offered side roles, odd jobs, or just made the host of variety acts. The studio couldn't turn him into a star because they didn't know what kind of star they wanted him to be. In 1951, Paar got a small role in a film called Love Nest. The movie wasn't anything special. It was black and white, made on a tight budget, and set in post-war New York. But it did have one strange detail. Marilyn Monroe played his girlfriend. At the time, she wasn't famous yet. She was billed fourth and mostly used for comic relief. Paar and Monroe on screen together now feels surreal. Two future stars. One would light up television, the other would become a global icon, sharing scenes before either of them had made it big. The film didn't do well, but it later became a piece of trivia in Hollywood history. It was one of the few movies where Paar acted in a real role. Most of his film career wasn't about acting in the usual way. He was used as an MC in variety films like Variety Time in 1948 and Footlight Varieties in 1951. These films weren't like normal movies. They were collections of different acts, music, comedy, dance, stitched together on screen. Paar's job was to introduce each act and keep the show moving. He was funny, friendly, and quick on his feet. He wasn't a movie star, but he stood out in his own way. One of those films even included performers like Liberace and Red Buttons. Paar's smooth delivery helped the show feel like it had a rhythm. even though it was just a bunch of short clips. Those skills later helped him become one of the biggest names in late-night TV. When Jack Paar took over The Tonight Show in July 1957, the show was dying. NBC had just tried to turn it into a late-night news magazine called Tonight, America After Dark, and it had failed badly. Viewers stopped watching. NBC stations stopped airing it. The whole format looked finished. Then came Paar. He was hosting a morning show on CBS, and no one expected much. But from his first week, everything changed. Paar didn't want sketches. He didn't want slapstick. He wanted real talk. He told producers, "Don't make it an interview, make it a conversation." So that's what he did. Every night, he sat down with guests and talked. Not just actors or singers, but thinkers, politicians, and newcomers. People like Fidel Castro, Billy Graham, and Judy Garland. He asked real questions. He listened. He opened up. Viewers came back. So did NBC's local stations. By the end of his first year, the show had become one of the most watched programs on television. In 1958, NBC renamed the show The Jack Paar Show. That almost never happened. It was a rare honor, and it showed how fast he'd become a star. Advertisers took notice. The show started making $10 to $15 million a year from ads, worth more than $150 million today. He was pulling in 7 million viewers every night. The number of NBC stations airing the show jumped from 60 to 158. At one point, he had 38 sponsors running ads during the same show. From denture cream to shampoo, everybody wanted a piece of Paar. And all of it happened from a tiny set. There was no big stage, no flashy lights, no dancing girls, just a desk, a sofa, and a piano played by his old army friend, Jose Melis. But the conversation was everything. Paar would cry. He would get angry. He would laugh so hard he'd have to stop talking. Guests would open up. Stories went deep. Viewers felt like they were eavesdropping on something private. That's what made it work. That's why it became the blueprint for every late-night show that came after. He wasn't just a talker. He was a talent scout. He gave Carol Burnett her first big break. Woody Allen, too. And Bill Cosby. And Liza Minnelli. They all had early appearances on Paar's show. He also brought back regulars that people didn't know at first, like Charlie Weaver or Alexander King, and turned them into household names. He loved to take risks on unknowns, and it paid off. Many careers began on his couch, but what made Paar truly different was how emotional he was. He cried on camera. He talked about his daughter getting her first bra. He talked about his frustrations, his fears, and his doubts. It made people uncomfortable. It also made them keep watching. Nobody on television had ever been that honest before. And then, in 1960, everything exploded. On February 10th, Paar had taped a 4-minute joke about the term water closet, the British word for toilet. It was silly, lighthearted, and full of wordplay. The story was about a Swiss schoolmaster who thought WC stood for Wayside Chapel, and he wrote a long letter explaining how it was 9 miles away, open only on Sundays, often so crowded that visitors had to share seats. But NBC censors cut it without telling Paar. Not one warning, not one conversation. Paar only found out after the show aired. He was furious. Not because the joke was cut, but because no one told him. He felt humiliated. He had poured himself into the show, and they'd edited his work behind his back. That kind of betrayal didn't sit well with him. The very next night, February 11th, Paar came back on air. But instead of doing the show, he gave a speech. It lasted 8 minutes. He looked into the camera and told the country he was quitting. "There must be a better way of making a living than this," he said. He was angry, sad, and tired. Then he walked off the set. Hugh Downs, his announcer, was left in shock. He had to finish the show by himself. Viewers couldn't believe what they were seeing. Newspapers ran the story on the front page. Paar was gone. People thought it might be a publicity stunt. It wasn't. Paar stayed off the air for almost a month. In the weeks that followed, NBC scrambled behind the scenes. The network needed him back. Paar had made the show a late-night powerhouse, and without him, they were falling apart. He had retreated to Florida during his absence, but talks about his return quietly started. Then, on March 7th, he walked back onto the stage. The audience was on their feet. He looked straight into the camera and said, "As I was saying before I was interrupted." Laughter broke out across the country. Then he added, "When I walked off, I said there must be a better way of making a living. Well, I've looked, and there isn't." The crowd loved him. His honesty made people feel like they knew him. He even admitted that his walkout was childish and perhaps emotional, but he didn't try to defend it. That only made the moment more powerful. Millions watched that night. His comeback became one of the most watched broadcasts of the year. Paar's exit had become national news the second it happened. Newspapers across America ran it on their front pages. NBC was panicking. Without Paar, The Tonight Show felt empty. They tried reruns. They used guest hosts. Nothing worked. Viewers kept tuning out. Paar wasn't just another TV host. He brought something wild, something human. Behind the scenes, executives met with him privately, even during accidental run-ins in Florida. They didn't want to admit they needed him, but they did. The tension between creative freedom and corporate control was on full display. Paar had crossed a line, and instead of getting punished, he got welcomed back. But Paar didn't just clash with NBC. He had a long list of enemies in the press, too. Gossip columnists like Walter Winchell and Dorothy Kilgallen became his favorite targets. Paar hit Winchell hard, calling him a silly old man who could not admit under oath that he writes his own columns. He made fun of Kilgallen's stiff delivery, saying she must use Novocaine lipstick because she never moves her lips when she talks. Paar didn't make quick jabs. He spent entire segments attacking them, especially during his final show on March 29, 1962. That night, he named them directly and tore into them with his trademark sarcasm. His feud with Winchell was the ugliest. Paar once mocked Winchell for wearing the American flag like a bathrobe, poking fun at his self-proclaimed patriotism. Winchell fired back in print, calling Paar a mean, sick, and malicious little man. NBC sometimes had to censor Paar's most brutal comments. These weren't light-hearted rivalries. They were public battles between TV and the press, with no rules and no mercy. Before the walkout, Paar had already proven he could start fires. Just 2 months earlier, in December 1959, he was locked in a feud with actor Jim Backus. Backus was best known as the voice of Mr. Magoo, and later as the rich man on Gilligan's Island. No one fully understood why Paar started insulting him, but the jabs kept coming. Backus fought back through interviews and press releases. Paar blamed others and kept fueling the drama. The timing made it even more interesting. Paar had been complaining about comedians who ranted against TV censorship, yet he would soon walk out for that exact reason. The Backus feud showed how quick Paar was to turn anything personal into a spectacle. He wasn't afraid to stir things up in other ways, too. In February 1959, just after Fidel Castro took control of Cuba, Paar flew to Havana and interviewed him for The Tonight Show. The episode was filmed at the Havana Hilton, and it became a sensation. The interview, done in English, showed Castro in a softer light. Paar asked him about raising his son and how television influenced children. At the time, Many Americans saw Castro as a revolutionary hero. But the mood would change. As Castro's regime turned more authoritarian, Paar's friendly interview aged badly. Paar later joked that Castro immediately turned anti-American after their talk. The remark was half funny, half regretful. That episode became one of the most controversial broadcasts in late-night history. In September 1961, Paar went to West Berlin, just a month after the Berlin Wall went up. He filmed near the Brandenburg Gate, with American soldiers standing in the background. The U.S. Defense Department took notice. Some officials thought the show looked too aggressive. Critics accused Paar of playing with Cold War tensions. He pushed back, saying his show actually helped reduce fear. But the backlash showed how seriously people took his influence. He wasn't just entertaining people anymore. He was shaping how they saw the world. There were other shocks, too. On January 3, 1964, Paar introduced the Beatles to American TV, a full month before Ed Sullivan did. He aired a clip of them singing "She Loves You." Most Americans had never seen them before, but Paar wasn't trying to make history. He didn't even like their music. He called them a psychological, sociological phenomenon and mocked their fans. He joked, "I understand science is working on a cure for this," and added, "It's nice to know that England has finally risen to our cultural level." Years later, he admitted, "I brought them here as a joke." Even when he was wrong, Paar never pretended otherwise. He also had firm lines he wouldn't cross. Christine Jorgensen, America's first famous transgender woman, had become a national figure. But Paar refused to have her on the show. He said she was too controversial. That refusal stood out. Paar had welcomed politicians, revolutionaries, and religious leaders, but when it came to Jorgensen, he said no. It wasn't just his personal choice. It was a sign of the times. Even shows built on controversy had limits. Decades later, people still talk about that missed moment. As the years went on, Paar started to fall behind the times. His jokes about gay people, once seen as edgy, became offensive. Social values were shifting fast, but Paar didn't keep up. His comments pushed viewers away. Ratings dropped. His style, once brave and new, now seemed out of touch. People who had once cheered for him were turning the channel. His downfall came slowly, one bad joke at a time. Still, his guest list had been legendary. He brought on future presidents like John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. He spoke with Senator Robert F. Kennedy. He hosted evangelist Billy Graham. These weren't quick interviews. Paar asked real questions and got real answers. He made late night feel important. People didn't just laugh, they listened. That format, mixing entertainment with politics and faith, shaped every talk show that followed. Jack Paar met Irene Gubbins at a radio station in Cleveland in the late 1930s. She was a pianist. He was just starting out. They married on Valentine's Day in 1938 in Mahoning, Ohio. But the relationship fell apart almost as fast as it began. They divorced 2 years later. Then came the twist. Just months after splitting up, they got married again on August 2, 1940, in Cuyahoga. But it didn't last. They divorced again. Same people, same story, twice. Years later, when asked about her, Paar could barely remember a thing. He said her name sounded familiar. That was it. No memories, no stories, nothing. It was like she had been erased from his life. This wasn't the only strange thing about Jack Paar. He once described himself using a long list of words: complicated, sentimental, honest, generous, and lonely. But he followed it with something that stuck. He said, "My personality is not split, it's shredded." He meant it. He was the kind of person who cried on national television one moment then lashed out at critics the next. He wasn't playing a role. He was showing the audience every part of himself, even the messy ones. That messiness spilled into his stories too. On live television, he once talked about his daughter getting her first bra. Another time, he described standing naked and shivering in a bathtub. Millions were watching, but he didn't hold back. Most hosts kept things polished. Jack didn't. His show felt personal. It was uncomfortable at times, but it was honest. That's why people watched. They never knew what he would say next. After his chaotic first marriage, Jack met Miriam Wagner at a dance while stationed at Indiantown Gap during World War II. They were engaged the next day. On October 9, 1943, they got married in Campbelltown, Pennsylvania. That marriage stuck. They stayed together for more than 60 years. Miriam brought calm to his storm. She grounded him. They had one daughter, Randy, born in 1949. No scandals, no repeats, just one long, steady partnership. Jack said he owed much of his success to her. Even with that stability at home, Jack was unpredictable at work. On March 29, 1962, he walked away from The Tonight Show. It was the #1 show. It brought in $15 million a year in advertising. But Jack had had enough. 2 years earlier, he had stormed off the air after NBC cut a joke about a toilet. He returned after 3 weeks. But in 1962, when he left again, it was final. He later said quitting was the biggest mistake of his life. That night ended his run and started Johnny Carson's. Jack tried again with the Jack Paar program in September 1962. It aired on Fridays. He interviewed stars like Judy Garland and Richard Burton. He even introduced the Beatles to American audiences weeks before their Ed Sullivan debut. But it didn't click. The weekly format lacked the spark of his nightly presence. By 1965, the show was canceled. Then came the surprise. At just 47, Jack walked away from television entirely. He bought a TV and FM radio station in Poland Spring, Maine. He paid $150,000 in cash. It was a huge amount at the time, especially for rural property. But Jack wanted peace. He ran the station himself and later sold it for a large profit. He had also invested early in Polaroid stock, which made him even richer. Most stars chase more fame. Jack left it behind. In 1973, ABC tried to bring him back. He agreed to host 1 week per month going up against Carson. But it was a disaster. Viewers didn't connect with him anymore. Times had changed. Jack knew it too. He said the comeback was a mistake. It ended quietly. What he did next shocked everyone. He started throwing away the original color videotapes of his show. Not a few. All of them. He would put them out with the garbage. What survives today are black and white film copies, grainy, incomplete, and low quality. Interviews, monologues, and moments that shaped early TV history are now gone forever. He erased his own legacy. In 1998, Jack had triple bypass surgery. An embolism followed. His health declined from that point on. He suffered a stroke in 2003. A year later, on January 27, 2004, he died in Greenwich, Connecticut. He was 85. His wife Miriam and daughter Randy were by his side. He was cremated. His ashes were returned to his family. Obituaries appeared in every major paper. Johnny Carson, the man who took his place, called him a unique personality who brought a new dimension to late-night television. That part was never forgotten.